This is the midweek Wednesday edition of Top Story. Good morning again. Thanks for joining us. With the fact that pot, marijuana, cannabis became legal last week, we spoke to, if you recall, the police chief, Stevenson, with regards to how his officers will be regulated, and talked a little bit with him about the known and unknown medical effects of cannabis and marijuana, and that's might be adding to the confusion around the legalization of it. So we thought we'd go to the best. We thought we'd go to the expert medical officer of health with the Algoma Public Health Unit, Dr. Marlene Spruitt. Dr. Marlene, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Me.
So how much do we know about marijuana and its medical effects?
We know some stuff. We don't have all the answers. Because the drug has been illicit for so many years, it hasn't been studied in the way that we could study tobacco or alcohol in a controlled fashion. So there's emerging literature, but there's a lot of unknowns.
Now, in a case like this, should we be treating it the same way we treat alcohol?
Pretty much so. So we have to remember with cannabis, there is medicinal cannabis still, which we're not really talking about today. That's prescribing it for specific conditions with the direction of a physician. But it's a recreational substance, and like all so far, websites crashing and lineups at retail outlets across the country, it appears there's an increased use. We know that about 25% of the population was already using cannabis when it was illegal, so those 25% will undoubtedly continue. And there's a number of others that will explore it. I think like a lot of new things, we'll see a huge rush at the beginning, and then people will say, I'd rather have my scotch, or I'd rather have my craft beer, because there's a variety of flavors and it's a more social thing than cannabis may be.
Now, with regards to cannabis per se, there's so many different strains of it. I had no idea.
Neither did I.
Really?
No, yeah, I mean,
because they've got some for everybody, apparently.
This is emerging literature, and the experts that grow the product have learned to breed it for certain strengths of the active chemicals, the THC and the CBD, and they're marketing it with clear information about the content of those, which is a big plus from what you were getting on the illicit market. You bought pot around the corner, you had no idea what was in it, you had no idea how much of the active ingredients were in there, or whether it was adulterated with something else. And now we at least know, when people are acquiring it legally, they know that what the product they're getting is clean, and they know the content. So if you've not used cannabis before, the advice is start with something very low in active content, and then see how that affects you, just like you do when you started to drink. I'm assuming 90% of the population is drinking, and so they usually started, and you knew a drink or two was all you could tolerate, and that's probably all we recommend you tolerate, but we know there's others that consume more and can tolerate more.
Do you feel that labeling cannabis, marijuana for recreational use is a good idea? Something like cigarette packaging. Is that something that you would be interested in?
You mean the blank labeling?
Yes. Yeah.
So
and saying, you know what, this could occur, and this.
There are limitations on what is allowed on the packaging and how they will be promoted. I am not really clear on all the details, but that's done at a federal level. Most of them won't be marketed by different suppliers. They will be standardized packaging.
And you mentioned medical marijuana and recreational marijuana. Of course, there's a difference. What do you feel, in you know, as high level as you are in the medical field, what do you think the differences are? Or are there?
the marijuana is the same.
It is the same
product.
Because I heard things like medical marijuana, they can take the actual part that makes you stoned out so that...
Well, that's the ratio of the THC and the CBD, and so the ratio of those can affect how much of a high you get versus some of the negative side effects.
Right.
And when you prescribe it medicinally, somebody has determined how much of the active THC content you need to control your symptoms. And that too is an emerging science because medicinal marijuana has not been well studied either. And there's various opinions out there on how effective it is for varying conditions. There are individuals that will swear it worked for them, but there's not overwhelming evidence that it is the best treatment for any particular condition.
Because we're so new to this world of legal marijuana in Canada, and there is that confusion around it, there's not a lot of research. How do parents handle the issue with their kids?
I think the same way they do with other substances that we use, alcohol and tobacco being the other two recreational substances that are in high use. And parents need to talk to their kids and they need to say, yeah, they're out there. They have negative health consequences. They can be fun to use because most parents who talk to their kids about alcohol are currently consuming, and that we have to be really concerned about heavy and repetitive use in young brains because both of those, all three of those substances can have negative effects on the development of the brain.
And we have seen that research-wise, right?
We have seen
Yes.
that. We don't have a lot because, again, we never followed kids that were smoking pot because it was illegal and they
Right.
didn't really tell us they were doing it. So we don't have really good studies. And so the next few years we're going to acquire a lot more information and hopefully it'll be shared as the literature emerges.
Now, in speaking with the police chief last week, we had such an interesting conversation because he has to think about the community and how this affects the community, of course, but also how it affects his officers, right? They can't come to work stoned, just like they can't come to work drunk. But with regards to that issue and whether or not we know how long it stays in the system, is it, in your mind, is it a good idea for us to shoot for like he says his officers can't come to work if they've had marijuana in the last 28 days?
And that's been a police guideline that we've heard.
Yes.
Each workplace will determine what their limitations are. Currently, we're hearing that they're recommending you don't drive for at least 6 hours after, which is a lot different than it is for alcohol.
That's the first time I've heard that.
And so that's just information that I've read, and that's based on small usage. You know, it depends.
Sure.
If you smoked 10 joints, then it's going to take much longer to clear from your system. I think the police are being cautious.
Extra cautious, yes.
And making sure it's totally out of someone's system before they come to work. So basically they're only going to smoke up when they're on vacation.
Right, right. So he also had an interesting perspective because obviously our officers deal with situations, you know, on the ground floor. He predicted that mental health admissions to emergency rooms, for instance, would increase because he said people who are moderately to severely dealing with mental health and on medication that is fairly strong, when they hear that pot now is legal, they're going to think that this is only going to help them. And he said it's going to send them off. Is that a reasonable assumption?
It's a possibility. I don't know how sure we can be of that assumption. Just because a product is legal doesn't mean it's safe. And so that's the message we want to give to individuals. Some people suffering from anxiety claim that marijuana helps them, and so there may be benefits that we don't know about yet. And but certainly mixing drugs is a problem. So mixing cannabis and alcohol is going to give you an increased impairment. If you're already on psychoactive drugs for your mental illness, then you should be really cautious before imbibing in any other substance. And I would have that discussion with the physician that's prescribing the drug you're on to really look in greater detail about whether there's a combination side effect.
And paranoia, you hear so much, is a large part of, when you mentioned anxiety, and I could see how people who have anxiety would tend to think this is going to relax me, but other people, it makes them paranoid.
Right. So anxiety to the extreme becomes
Right.
paranoia.
So you're trying to help, and now you've increased it.
And just like tobacco, people think a cigarette actually relaxes them, but it
Yes.
is a stimulant, and it increases your heart rate and has those side effects. So drugs that are said to relax you often do in small doses, but once you exceed a certain threshold, the effects become more negative.
This will be something I'm sure that you'll be interested to watch the cycle as it emerges, especially our first year in.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to observe, and hopefully as we get new information, we'll be able to share that with the public as soon as things occur.
Terrific. Thank you so much for coming in this
was a
morning. I
pleasure.
appreciate it. I appreciate your
Thanks.
insight. We'll take this break. We'll be back with more Top Story right after this.